هذه الذين اصطفى أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم قل للمؤمنين يغضوا من أبصارهم ويحفظوا فروجهم ذلك أزكى لهم إن الله خبير بما يصنعون وقل للمؤمنات يغضضن من أبصارهن ويحفظن فروجهن ولا يبدين زينتهن إلا ما ظهر منها وليضربن بخمرهن على جيوبهن ولا يبدين زينتهن إلا لبعولتهن أو آباء بعولتهن أو أبنائهن أو أبناء بعولتهن أو إخوانهن أو بني إخوانهن أو بني أخواتهن أو نسائهن أو ما ملكت أيمانهن أو التابعين غير أولي الإربة من الرجال أو الطفل الذين لم يظهروا على عورات النساء ولا يضربن بأرجلهن ليعلم ما يخفين من زينتهن وتوبوا إلى الله جميعا أيها المؤمنون لعلكم تفلحون صدق الله العظيم وبلغنا رسوله النبي الكريم ونحن على ذلك من الشاهدين والشاكرين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Surah Nur. Starting last night, we started reading the ayat where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us commands which He has given out of His mercy to prevent zina, to prevent vulgarity and corruption and lewdness in the society. Last night we read 3 ayat which talk about getting permission before entering the house and not entering the house when there is no permission. Tonight we are going to read ayat about what is famously known as hijab or parda, which is that men and women are supposed to not look at each other and hide each other from each other, those that are not permitted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the first command here, so we should keep in mind that these 2 ayat of Surah Nur talk about it here. Also in Surah Ahzab, some commands about hijab have been given, and those were given before this ayah. So some these ayat. So some details are given there, some details are given here, and that was roughly 3, or according to the stronger narration, 5th year after Hijri, when the Prophet ﷺ and the nikah of Sayyidah Zainab bint al-Jahash radiyallahu anha took place. So combining all these, this session and the tafsir session is not primarily a session of fiqh or specific detailed masail, rulings of deen. Those should always be consulted with the ulama depending on the situation. But inshallah here, and when we do Surah Ahzab, we'll do the detail which is necessary under the ayat that have been given by the Quran. Also, what should be mentioned is that the Quran, when the Quran gives a specific command about something, it becomes farz. So the commands that we are reading here, they are among the faraiz. Farz is not the only thing that people have to do. There is wajibat, there is sunan, there is mustahabbat, there is the action of the Sahaba, and before applying these teachings to our life, we have to look at how the Sahaba applied it, how the Prophet ﷺ taught them, and how the Sahaba used to do it. So therefore, Quran alone is not enough. We have to look at the practice of the Sahaba as well, and inshallah whatever is mentioned we'll try to mention here as well, inshallah. The first ayah talks about the believing men. قُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ, tell the believing men, يَغُضُّوا مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ, that they must lower their gazes. So the Prophet ﷺ has told us that seeing and what a person does through their eye is the first of the poisonous arrows of the shaitan, the first of the things through which shaitan does its work. So when somebody looks, then that's the first step, and then there's other steps, and then the ultimate end is fornication or zina or vulgarity. So therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is prohibiting the first step that goes in that direction, and وَيَحْفَظُوا فُرُوجَهُمْ, and guard their private parts. So the Prophet ﷺ has mentioned that this whole spectrum that starts from the vision and culminates in the actual act, everything in between, the first step, which is the sight, and the last step, which is the actual act, and everything in between has been made haram by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that Muslims stay chaste and pure. Now, men are supposed to lower their gaze. This is the ruling for men, to look at the parts of a non-mahram in a way that incites passion among oneself, that raises the desire, that is expressly prohibited. To look without desire is highly despised, but here the particular aspect which is mentioned is to look with desire. So to look with desire is expressly prohibited in haram, and to look without desire is also very despised. The Prophet ﷺ has detailed this, elaborated this, that if somebody accidentally looks at something which they are not supposed to look at, the Prophet ﷺ said that the first sight is forgiven, the first vision is forgiven, provided that it is without intent. If somebody intentionally looks, then even the first one is prohibited. But if somebody accidentally looks at something and lowers their gaze, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forgiven that accidental look. The Prophet ﷺ, that's another famous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ has said that when somebody lowers their gaze, even when they want to look, Allah gives them such strong iman right there and then, that they feel the sweetness of that iman, the flavor of that iman in their heart right there and then. So the command for believing men is to lower their gaze. ذَلِكَ أَزْكَى لَهُمْ. That is the most pure, the most decent thing for them to do. إِنَّ اللَّهَ خَبِيرٌ بِمَا يَصْنَعُونَ. And know that Allah is fully aware of what you create, of what you do, whatever you manufacture. So whatever is going on in your head, nobody will know, but Allah knows. Whatever is going on in your heart, nobody knows, but Allah knows. Whatever you're doing in public or private, the world might think that you are a pious person, but whatever is in your head, Allah knows. So guard your thoughts, guard your things that other people do not know. Allah knows what you do. Allah knows what you manufacture. وَقُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنَاتِ. And say to the believing women, يَغْضُضْنَ مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِنْ. Same command, that they lower their gaze. So for a woman to look at a man with desire or where there is fitna possible, it's prohibited. وَيَحْفَظْنَ فُرُوجَهُنْ. And guard, secure their private parts. وَلَا يُبْدِينَ. Now for women, because they are traditionally the center of beauty or the more beautiful of the two, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given some extra commands. وَلَا يُبْدِينَ زِينَتَهُنَّ إِلَّا مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا. And they must not expose their beauty. And this zinat literally means that zinat which is a thing of beauty that people use to beautify themselves by consciously. So this includes clothing, this includes jewelry, this includes makeup, all sorts of things that one does to beautify themselves. Muslim women are supposed to hide it, they are not allowed to expose it. إِلَّا مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا. Except for that which appears thereof. So the detail has been written by Abdullah, has been explained by Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anh and other Sahaba, that this refers to those parts of the body that a woman when working just cannot keep covered. For example, when they have to work with hands, or when they have to walk with feet. So feet and hands are the parts which are illa ma zahara minha, that they are exposed, they are allowed to be exposed even when a non-mahram is around. Some Sahaba have said that this includes the face as well, and some fuqaha have also went with the meaning that face is also included in this, not the hair, not the head, but the face is also, according to some fuqaha, included in illa ma zahara minha, that which is hard to be covered. But remember two things. Even if we go with this understanding of the Sahaba in the Quran that face is excluded, that command for men to lower their gaze still applies. So for a woman to expose her face in a certain situation is maybe allowed, but for a man to look at that face is prohibited. Similarly, the other thing that applies is that even the fuqaha and the sahaba who have went with the meaning that illa ma dhahara minha, that which is hard to be covered at all times, includes face as well apart from hands and feet, they also have very strictly mentioned that when there is a chance of corruption and vulgarity, and when the environment is such that men are not very pure and of chaste character, and there is chance that they will run into fitna, that in such places and such situations face has to be covered as well, which is the general environment these days. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. وَلْيَضْرِبْنَ بِخُمُرِهِنَّ عَلَى جُيُوبِهِنَّ. Khumur means the covering that is used to cover the head. So therefore Allah is telling us that there has to be a head covering for women. وَلْيَضْرِبْنَ بِخُمُرِهِنَّ عَلَى جُيُوبِهِنَّ. Jaib or juyub means this part, that part which is traditionally has a cut on the chest, that part of the clothing that covers the chest. So Allah is saying that that piece of clothing or cloth that they use to cover on their head, they should also apply it and use it to cover this part. And juyub is not the part of body, it's the part of clothing. So khumur will cover the juyub, which means that the head covering will also cover the clothing that covers the chest. So therefore a qamis or a kurta or any shirt that covers and is on the body, that is not part of khumur, that is juyub, that is jaib. Because the Prophet ﷺ, this famous hadith, the Prophet ﷺ has said, "Laysa minna man dharaba al-khulud wa shaqqa al-juyub." Those who tear their clothing from here, their what we call collars, they are not from among us. So the Prophet ﷺ is not talking about tearing the body parts, he's talking about a piece of clothing. So that piece of clothing has to be covered by another piece of clothing, and that piece of clothing is khumur, which is used to cover the head. And the way of the juhala, the ignorant people at that time, was that even those women would cover their head, but their khumur will hang on the sides. Their dupatta or their khumur, their head covering will hang on the sides. Allah is telling the Muslim women, the believing women, the mu'minat, to use that same clothing, the cloth, to cover their front part of the clothing that covers the chest as well. وَلَا يُبْدِينَ زِينَتَهُنَّ إِلَّا. So this part, inshallah, this part of the ayah will inshallah do tomorrow. وَلَا يُبْدِينَ, not tomorrow, Monday inshallah. وَلَا يُبْدِينَ زِينَتَهُنَّ إِلَّا لِبُعُولَتِهِنَّ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making some exceptions, that these parts that we are telling you to cover, they can be exposed to some of the relatives, and that is the mention of the clear, specific mention, exact mention of who are the maharim, who are the people to whom these beauties can be exposed. When it is mentioned that furujahum, for men, furuj are the private parts. The definition of private part for men is from the belly button to the knees and everything that is in between. For women, as we mentioned, everything apart from hands and feet, and according to some fuqaha and ulama, the face. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. اللهم اجعلنا من أهل القرآن الذين هم أهلك وخاصتك. وصلى الله تعالى على خير خلقه سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. آمين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.